Hey there, Squirrel Army. How's it going? For today, I am discussing whether content creators rely on the crutch of, well, it depends too much.
You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing.
Okay, so I'm discussing whether the content creators rely on this crutch of, well, it depends too much. And, well, I've said it a lot. I think I'm kind of guilty of doing this and saying this, but the format is so diverse, incredibly diverse. And again, you can't make blanket statements about any strategy or any deck or any archetype for the most part. And again, we discussed this in the having a basic checklist and going outside of that checklist, like it depends what you're doing. Like, it really depends what you're doing. So again, that's why content creators like me use these phrases, but perhaps we do use it, like we have to use it, and it is a crutch in a way, and it is one of those things that perhaps you, again, take it with a grain of salt or whatever, but it's just one of those things that, you can't, or we can't, no one can make generic statements. You can give people a guideline or a checklist or whatever else that you want to give them of, this is what we generally recommend for most decks, because most decks will fall into that. But again, the problem is that more modern decks, I think, that come out, more modern cards that come out, the more that the format continues to evolve and change. And I think that the generic, this is what we recommend, is becoming less and less and less of a thing that most decks are going to want to keep in mind for the most part. There's some golden truth sometimes. Of course, it depends. Again, I can't get away from saying it depends, but none of us can, because it really, really, really does. If I'm playing, Kozilek, we talked about Kozilek before, or any of the colorless Eldrazi, or even another 6 or 7 mana commander, it's gotta be doing something, brother. Especially if I'm sitting across the table from you and you're playing Kozilek or whatever else it is, and I'm already on, me and the other 3 players that are in the game are probably off to the races playing most of our bigger haymakers to try to start, dominating the game so that we can end the game, or start to look like we're starting to play our haymakers. You're definitely going to play your haymaker, but your haymaker is just your commander for the most part. And yes, you might have other, 5 and 6 mana Eldrazi or whatever in your hand, and they can be haymakers, but again, with that new Eldrazi commander, the Cascade one, you want that thing out on the field before you're really playing a lot of your 7 mana plus spells. Yes, you can play your 6 mana or whatever less spells, but you don't want to be playing your bigger spells, because you want to save those for when your commander's out on the field and you get additional card advantage or whatnot from those cards, because again, Colorless doesn't have very many ways to sort of get card advantage, so you might as well, especially consistent and reliable card advantage, so you might as well take it when it's offered to you, right? Especially when it's right there in the command zone. But still, again, it's one of those things. Me and the other 3 players will be doing a whole bunch of stuff, and we will know that you're going to play your Kozilek or whatever else that you're playing again. So we're going to be looking over at that side of the table and go, okay, he has, he has 6 mana. Maybe next turn he can have 10 mana. So that means that the turn after he can play his commander. So we're going to be knowing what you're doing. Like, we know that you're going to get your commander out, and your commander is going to do some work for you. And we don't want that. So we might just start focusing on you if we know you can get your commander out in 2 turns. We might not literally be trying to take you out of the game or kill you. We just want to make sure that we're not just going to be destroyed completely, like once you get your commander out, or just trying to slow you down, just to make sure that we've got the upper hand over you, because again, we don't want to be having to deal with big old Kozilek, and we want to keep the game between, us 3 that are already kind of like vying for number 1 for the most part, which is a bit shitty sometimes in a way, but again, that's kind of how it is. So you've got to really force your way into that skirmish when you're kind of like, well, you're not really behind because you're keeping up in terms of mana and perhaps cards as well in some ways, because again, you're not really like deploying a whole lot of stuff, so a lot of stuff is still in your hand. So it's one of those things, but again, like, you don't want to like make it appear like you are going to get your commander out. You want to just, okay, here he comes, right here, right now, like before anyone's really ready for it. You really want those people to be caught off guard and be like, holy shit, I didn't see that he could get his commander out this quickly. Because otherwise, again, you're just kind of like telegraphing to people, hey, I'm going to get my commander, maybe not next turn, but the turn after. Oh, well, shit, well, we better start doing something to you just to keep you at bay for a little while so that we can continue to like battle between us 3. And whatnot for that number 1 slot. And, that is a tough situation to be in, but you're not like literally being taken out of the game yet or whatever, and you're not literally being stopped. So you've still got that chance to get in that game and take that number 1 slot, because again, you're playing a big haymaker. But again, just saying that that's what everyone's going to play is not the truth. Like, again, like, I don't play that way, and I don't know many people. I know a couple of people that play that way, but again, like, that's a very, like, actually a very Timmy sort of style of strategy. I'm just going to play big beating Kozileks and whatnot. That's what I'm playing. Sounds fun to me, honestly, to a degree, but I would rather play that in like Simic or something or whatever that just ramps really hard and just be like, okay, cool, here's Kozilek or whatever, and people are going to be like, oh shit, because it wasn't in the command zone, and people are just like, oh no, now we've got to deal with somebody that's in Simic and has Kozilek on the field, like, that's really dangerous. Like, so, like, it depends. Like, it always depends. Like, so if I've got a 2-mana commander or a 3-mana commander, well, I don't hardly have to ramp into that at all. Like a 3-mana commander, maybe to a degree, yes, you can run 1-drop or 2-drop ramp, but you don't need to try super hard to get that out there that much, because you're going to get it maybe on turn 3, maybe on turn 4. That's all right, but you don't need to worry about that too much. Like, once it gets to 5 and above, I think that's where you need to start going, right, I need to be running a lot more ways to sort of get my commander out much more quickly, because, like, again, this is the game commander. It's right there in the name. Often enough, the commander is very important to the strategy. Most decks are built around it. Not every deck 100 or 1,000% needs their commander, but at least most decks are thinking that they're going to get their commander out most of the games to start their game plan and start doing what their deck is really doing, because again, it's mostly all built around the commander. Like, again, like in my 2-drop commander deck, like, I could just be like, okay, I'm not going to play my commander, I'm just going to play a whole bunch of these random humans. But then I'm just going to go, okay, well, I'm going to cast my commander, and what's that? Oh, well, now all my humans are mana dogs as well, so boop, and now I have, like, a whole bunch more mana to play with. But that commander is so good at helping get everything else out that's often enough I do just cast it like that and just be like, okay, now I can cast everything else out from my hand, or try to. Again, because again, that deck is very low to the ground, doesn't need a bunch more other ramp for the most part, not none, but it doesn't really need a whole bunch more because it turns everything else that's a human in that deck into ramp. So again, I need to not have to run that much ramp because again, that deck isn't typical and whatnot. So it depended on what I was doing. So that whole it depends whatever sort of crutch is almost always going to apply because, like, again, the uniqueness and the diversity of the commanders, and I like that they're, giving us a diverse range and all these really cool commanders that do all these interesting things, because that is what Commander is kind of about, doing all these creative things people have wanted to kind of do. That's why, like, people were bummed that there wasn't an energy commander or whatever back when, they released energy and that sort of thing. Now they've kind of released energy as kind of a thing, like, I can't remember, it was a secret layer, I think. But yeah, like, or maybe it was something else. I can't really remember because like they're releasing 500 things every minute, like literally, I think now. But whatever, it's one of those things. Like, I like the diversity, but just perhaps the volume perhaps is just a little too much sometimes. Like I so to say, but it's just one of those things that I don't like, especially like a lot of commanders. I just like, I think like the consensus is that there's only a couple of commanders that come out in a set that are actually kind of get the creative energy or the creative juices of people going, oh wow, this could actually be a really good commander to play around with, because there's not that many other commanders that kind of it feels like, well, I can actually do something with this, or this could actually be a decent payoff, or this could actually be worthwhile me investing my time into, because like a lot of commanders just kind of fall into this, a lot of like there's a lot of uninspired commanders because they're just like filler cards for the most part, and I don't know whether that's to do with standard balancing, draft balancing, or they're just like trying to jam out a bunch of like legends into Commander and be like, if some person is like looking for this, maybe like they'll pick it up or whatever. And there's often a few commanders that are a non-bow within themselves or whatever and things like that, or mostly non-bow with whatever's kind of in their colors and whatnot. So, like one of the ones that always stands out to my mind is I think it's Azorius commander. I can't remember its name, but it's an Azorius land ramping commander. I think it's a merfolk. I can't remember its name. So it wants you to effectively play multiple lands per turn and that sort of thing. So in those colors, guess what? There's not a huge amount, not none, but not a huge amount of ways to get extra land falls. So that's really hard for that deck to kind of do. It's a really janky kind of fun way to kind of like, it's a interesting like build because it's such a divergent from, green is the color of land ramp and no other colors really do it. Kind of white kind of does the catch-up version of it, which if you're already playing a land turn, that effectively ramps you. So, like, you really need to be able to time that well. So you need to play your 2-drop on turn 3 when somebody before you has played their 3rd land drop, so that then you can play your 3rd land drop after you've like ramped. So now you're on 4. But now you're ahead, and like Now the problem is getting back to being behind to a degree, because if you've got more of those effects in your deck, then you're going to be sitting there and going, well, what am I going to do when I hit one of them and I'm already got my lands? Well, maybe I don't really care, or maybe it doesn't really matter, or something else, or maybe like my opponents will just ramp further ahead anyway, because like Steve over there is playing a landfall deck or whatever, so like he's probably going to land ramp ahead. And if you're playing against a lot of green players, then they're probably going to land ramp, not always, but often enough. So you're going to be sitting there and going, well, that stonks for me, because again, I now can turn on the cards that say if I'm behind my opponents, hey, I can catch back up and effectively get ahead, because I can play that land for turn as well from my hand if I have it. So yes, I would say that some of us creators need to get away from it depends sometimes, but like I say, the format is too goddamn diverse, and it's just going to get more and more diverse as we keep going on. And maybe those old templates and those old checklists and whatnot of commander decks are going to change. But I don't know that they can, because you still need generic advice for people to kind of be able to, especially new people, to be kind of going, well, I want a starting point. I want to know where I need to look to start, at least, so that I can play this deck and get a feel for like what it's doing, what I need, like whatever else, so that again, I'm not just like, I don't have enough card draw because that wasn't in like my template of thinking that, oh, my commander does this, so I just don't need it, or whatever. My commander is ramp, so I just kind of don't need it, or whatever. No, you still need it, but you need to be really built around using that for an advantage. And like I said, with my Simic deck, I've still got a whole bunch of ramp cards that are in that deck, especially to get to the commander, which is 4 mana, but that's not that huge of an effect for the most part. But a lot of those other cards that are in that deck also make additional mana. So that means that those mana dorks aren't just now tapping for 1, they're tapping for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. That's why a lot of those mana dorks are in there. They're not just there to get my commander out, they're there to help make the more mana that I need to make. Even though my commander makes everything into a mana dork as well, but still it's one of those things that you want your mana dorks that are actually mana dorks that aren't as useful to be producing more mana in that deck, because you want your big beaters to be big beaters. You don't really want them to be mana dorks for the most part. You want them to attack, and then you want them to be mana dorks afterwards, later on, or whatnot. But you want to keep them open for the most part, because again, then you can block and then you can defend, unless you've got something really big and something else that can come out right here, right now, and you're not going to get swept or whatever. Then you can certainly. But like again, if you've got like Teferis or ways to play things at instant speed, especially, you're going to be sitting there and going, well, I don't really care what my opponents are going to do, because even if they do Wrath, well, I can float my mana, and then I can, plop a bunch of my things out at flash speed and, get back in this game and get some value or whatever. So it always is going to depend. And the checklist, the guidelines and whatnot have got to keep changing with the ever-evolving state of the overall format. Like I said a few years ago, I think we needed less removal to an extent, because there wasn't as many really good threats as there are now. There's certainly a whole bunch more really good threats now, and things that win the game and that sort of thing. Like, Tulane almost wins the game. Korvold pretty much wins the game by themselves. Those sorts of commanders. like, even if you're saying, well, it only delays it for a turn or two or whatever because they're going to ramp back into it and get it back out, well, those couple of turns could be the crucial thing, perhaps, just for you just to have that little bit of more breathing room and say, well, what I did in those 2 turns was attack my opponent for 10 damage or whatever it was, or for 12 damage. So they've got less life, plus my other opponents attack them for, an amount of damage. So they're at a lot lower life now than what they were. So maybe the rest of us can have a chance in this game if they don't literally win with Corvold or Tulane the turn that they play them. Perhaps we've got a turn or two to sort of like keep our game plan moving and keep that Tulane Corvold player at bay or whatever else, so that we can, make sure, like, we don't want them to not play the game, but if they play the game, it's like, well, they're probably just going to win. So it's just like that fight between, like, we've got to keep this game interesting for them, and keep them on edge, and just slow them down so that we at least have a chance, because you never know with those really powerful commanders when they're going to kind of just like slap the door shut and kind of, shut everybody down, or just like win out of nowhere. So it's just, you need to really, really have the sort of ability to like make sure that that's always a priority. Like, removal is always a priority, and whatnot, and it's becoming more and more of a priority. The problem that does come up a lot of the time is like the design space, I think. And, I think the designers are much more interested in designing threats than they are in designing answers for those threats. So we don't get, I often don't get enough answers for the threats that are kind of in the format, even with access to pretty much every, removal that's in existence. Even so, it's just one of those things. Again, like, I'm not going to run Lightning Bolt just to kill something, like, because Lightning Bolt's not very good. So I don't want to just run that in my deck, because yes, it's a low opportunity cost in terms of mana and whatnot, but it just doesn't do enough for me to kind of go, well, it's worth running or whatever. Like, you'd have to be a really desperate deck to be running Lightning Bolt, in my opinion. Like, unless you're just running it for like a pet card or whatever, then that's a bit different. But like, again, for actual removal and whatnot, yes, it does kill a few things and whatnot, not that it doesn't kill anything. And if somebody's thing just needs 3 more damage to kill it, then, well, there you go. But still, I don't know. Or again, sometimes it's janky when somebody's at 3 life or less, and then, like, somebody gets the lightning bolt or whatever. But again, like, it's just one of those things that doesn't come up a whole lot, and you've got other ways to probably kill people anyway. So it's just like one of the least relevant things, that is out there. I'm not the most big fan of a braid, but a braid isn't the worst, because at least it's kind of modal and whatnot. It is kind of lightning bolt, but it is also a destroy artifact effect. So that's not as bad. I feel like you are playing 1 more mana for it, but still the modalness of it kind of makes up for it. So that is like a little bit more worth it. But again, like, just saying, like it depends on who you are and what you think sometimes is worth it. Like, as I said, you can take anything I say or any other creator says with a grain of salt. You can say, oh no, Lightning Bolt's the best card ever in existence or whatever, or think that or whatnot, and think that I'm totally wrong about Lightning Bolt. But like, to me, it's not that amazing. Like, to me, it's not a card that I would seek to run in any deck, pretty much. Maybe Torbran could think about it, maybe, but again, like, there's a bunch of other spells like Lava Coil that are probably just better than it, so you rather run something like that, or even a Braid again, like, because at least, like, again, the modality is still there, and, it still does the same amount of damage, 5 damage when you're in that Torbran deck. Yes, it is 1 more mana, but still, I think the modalness makes up for it in that regard, but that's only a spell that I would sort of run in certain decks that don't have enough sort of answers in their colors to deal with certain things and whatnot. So I'm always looking at my own decks and going, well, what am I trying to do? Or what colors have I got? Or what have I got access to? And what is relatively decent that kind of, like, has some extra utility, because that's the thing now. Like, again, you can't just play cards that do one thing. You need to play cards that do extra work, because, like, that's why, like, a few of in my decks now, like, I've just started going, I can't just play these, like, Llanowar Elves, Wood Elves, whatever, that sort of style of stuff, for the most part, because they don't do anything else. They're just a mana dork. Yes, they're a very efficient mana dork, but that's it. Like, I can play a mana dork that's 1 more mana, and maybe that's a little bit worse, but it tends to make more mana, or it tends to do more things that are more relevant, so it's more worth it. And yeah, I don't know. It's just tough to make those calls sometimes, but none of my decks are that hyper efficient and don't need to be, so I just go, well, if I'm not that worried about being hyper efficient and just hope, kind of like hanging on the extra utility of some other cards and whatnot, or the potential upsides of cards, then you know what, that's probably worth it, because there's something inherent within those extra effects. So, paying that 1 more mana might just be worth it for the most part. Especially, like, like, as you go later and later in the game, like, you go, wow, cool, I drew, yes, a 1 mana mana dork means you're not going to have to spend as many resources as a 2 mana mana dork, perhaps, but if you've got your Beast Whisperers or whatever else you've got at that point, which you're probably going to have, like, it's going to draw you a card probably anyway, or maybe 2 cards or whatever else it is. It depends what you've got again. So, yeah, it always is situational. Like, no card, for the most part, is that good on its own in a vacuum. Cards are only that good because of the context of the game or the moment or whatever that you're in. Again, Lightning Bolt, in my opinion, not that amazing, but when somebody's at 3 life and it's down to a 1-on-1 after everyone else has gotten knocked out, that Lightning Bolt is the best card that was in your deck that you could have drawn at that moment. And it's a really cool, funny, janky moment to be like, I killed you with Lightning Bolt in Commander. I did it, like, that's one of those, like, bucket list style, achievement unlocked type moments in the game that a lot of people sometimes talk about. I don't really think about things like that for the most part, but it's funny when it does happen or whatever or whatnot. Like, so, you can't be mad when somebody does that. Like, you've been playing this game back and forth. You're on 3 life, and then they top deck Lightning Bolt and kill you. You've got to laugh and go, well fucking done, and shake their hand and say, good game. That was amazing. You pulled Lightning Bolt, and friggin' got me, with Lightning Bolt. You probably might not never do it again, but that was cool. That was funny. And that was, perfect timing, for that Lightning Bolt and whatnot. And, like, now you're glad you kind of had it in your deck or whatever. But 9 times out of 10, you're just sitting there with it going, is that thing got less than 3 power, or 3 power or less, or toughness or less? What does it do? Will I kill it? I don't know. And things like that. You're just debating whether to use it on a Planeswalker that has 3 loyalty, or whatever. Like, still, I don't know. It's one of those things. Again, it depends on all the situations that you're facing when you're in that game and at that situation where you have Lightning Bolt in your hand and there is a Planeswalker that's got 3 loyalty or whatever. So, it depends. Do they have, blockers, or do they have Ghostly Prison or whatever else? Not that Ghostly Prison protects Planeswalkers, but again, it does protect, the player and things like that. So, and there are other, of those effects, again, like I say, so I'm just using that as a generic kind of guidepost of saying, oh, yeah, you can't attack me, type cards. Because, again, that's kind of what you get and whatnot. But still, so, you're always having to assess everything live as in real-time events. You can't, Swords to Plowshares, obviously it's a really good card or whatever, but it's an even better card because of all the cards that people run in this format. When Perthros or any of the other gods, most of the other gods aren't that amazing, but you know what I mean? Any of those gods, you don't want them to have those other gods once they're a creature. What's that? Swords to Plowshares gets them, or Path to Exile gets them? Right, Path to Exile that thing, or Swords that thing right frickin' now. Soon as I can Path it or Swords it, once it's a creature, I am going to. Because I am not letting you keep Perthros especially on the field. But, any of the other ones, you probably still want to think about swordsing or pathing at some point once they're a creature. The rest of them aren't as threatening, I would say, but still, you still want to think about it because you're just they're going to get too much value out of this, and otherwise I'm not going to be able to deal with it very easily because there's not that many enchantment exiling effects that are actually any good, which is weird. I don't understand why WotC hasn't given White a, exiling disenchant effectively. So I don't know, but they have printed a few 3-mana ones, but I always say that 3 manas or 2 mana is really the cutoff for instant speed targeted removal for the most part, for me at least. So anything more than that is just not really worth it. It's got to kill 2 or more things at that point. So that's not single target removal anymore. That's multiple target removal. Unless you're playing a flicker kind of card, or flicker kind of deck, or a recursive kind of deck where you're immediately going to sacrifice it and bring it back and that sort of thing or whatnot, that style of stuff. So again, it does depend on that deck because, most decks I wouldn't think Ravenous Chupacabra is that amazing or whatever. But the ones that make each opponent sack a creature, those are pretty goddamn effective because you 3 for 1 effectively, that's really effective. And yes, you don't have control over it, but on turn 3 or even on turn 4 or sometimes even on turn 5, people aren't going to have as many options as what they're going to have later on in the game. So those edict effects can still be very powerful, especially if you are playing Mirren or those other styles of decks, and they can be pretty mean. So it depends on what you're kind of doing. I wouldn't maybe you can run them in general to a degree because they do provide a pretty decent upside for the most part, and it's not too disadvantageous to just I'm going to set my opponents back. I don't know what they're going to lose, but they're going to lose something, and that is good for me. So, and it's not 1 for 1, and on my other 2 opponents didn't effectively go up a card effectively or whatnot, that sort of thing. So, I'm really ahead at this point. So, they just are generically good in that way in this format because they do affect each player. But when each player has nothing, then it's kind of well, that's not doing anything more unless it says if they can't sacrifice something or whatever, they have to do something else like discard a card or take 3 damage or whatever, those other effects. So having those flexible creatures or other effects that kind of do more is well worth it again, especially when you're getting into that, because again, like, you don't know what your opponents are going to have and when they're not going to have something or whatever. So just going, well, whatever you have, you're going to take a negative effect. So that's well worth it. It might not be the most powerful effect, but, like one or two, even one damage to each opponent, that's 3 damage off a 3 mana spell, which isn't amazing, but it's to each opponent. And then it's 3 damage to each opponent, which is really good, or whatnot, for those who can't discard or can't sack, whatever else it is. So, yeah, that's one of those things that I was thinking about, sort of style of stuff that I was adding to my Rakdos deck, because I'm like, well, asymmetry is good for that deck, and I want to sack stuff, and those wouldn't be a bad sack target, and would be a really good reanimation target. So maybe I want to run them, but maybe I just want to run the 2 best ones or whatever else it is, whatnot. So I'm going to think about keeping my eye on that, because I am running Grave Pact and those sorts of things, but maybe it's I'm already, I'm a kind of a sacrifice deck, but you've got to have the payoffs for those sacrifice effects. So I don't know. So it's kind of maybe I should just run things that make my opponent sack stuff, rather than hoping that, I will make them sack stuff, by just, playing these enchantments that are kind of big targets and don't really work with the rest of the deck. So I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. And again, it depends. I've got to think about it. I've got to think through it and go, is this the best strategy? What should I do? And, continue to look at that deck, and perhaps, I probably need to play it soon, because I haven't played it for a while since I put in those cards and that. So I probably need to play it so that I can actually see what those cards are kind of doing. Are they doing the thing that I want, or are they just a little bit too slow? But again, they are repeatable. So I'm just kind of well, do I want to figure out more ways to recur these things, which I could, but is that really, kind of annoying to my opponents? Yes, but still that would be the same as if I was running this and it was actually working multiple times per turn or whatever. So, I don't know. Plus I've got just more synergy with creatures, so yeah. But anyway, that is that. And those are most of my thoughts on this. So yeah, you guys can let me know what you guys think. Writing your thoughts down there in the comments below. Hope you've enjoyed this one. Hope you'll join me again in another one.